Welcome to XRP Pro Ledger, and today we need to address something directly before we get into the data, because I want to talk about the frustration first. The price is sitting sideways, weeks have gone by, and retail investors who have been waiting patiently are starting to question everything. I understand that, and I want to be direct with you. That frustration is not a signal that something is wrong. It is a signal that something is being set up, because while retail is questioning the thesis and quietly moving toward the exits, institutions are moving in the opposite direction, quietly, deliberately, without announcing it. 6 institutional ETF funds have now locked up over 848 million XRP. That number was 771 million just 6 weeks ago. Stay with this analysis until the end, because the BlackRock factor and what Larry Fink's $10 trillion machine entering this market actually means, combined with the $150 trillion global banking trap that XRP was specifically built to solve, changes the entire frame of what sideways price action actually represents. Let me address the psychology directly, because this is where most retail investors make the permanent mistake. The chart looks flat, volume feels thin, and the natural conclusion is that the market has forgotten about XRP. But here is what that conclusion misses entirely. Institutional accumulation, by design, does not look exciting. It is not supposed to. When large capital pools are building positions, the last thing they want is a rising price drawing attention to what they are doing. They need time. They need low volatility. They need retail sellers providing supply at the lowest possible cost. And right now, all three of those conditions are perfectly in place. The frustration retail investors feel is the exact operational environment that institutional programs are designed to exploit. Every seller who exits out of boredom hands their position to a buyer who already knows where this is going. That is not a theory. The on-chain data confirms it, and the ETF accumulation numbers make it undeniable. Now let us talk about what is actually happening beneath the surface, because while the public price chart shows nothing, the ETF data tells a completely different story. 6 institutional funds, Bitwise, Canary Capital, Franklin Templeton, 21 Shares, Grayscale, and Rex Osprey, have collectively accumulated over 848 million XRP. And this did not happen over years. In just 87 days of operation, these 6 funds have produced $2.53 billion in cumulative trading volume. They peaked at $113 million in a single session. Think about that for a moment. $113 million in one trading session in a market that retail describes as dead. These are not retail investors taking small positions. These are institutional capital allocators building large, long-duration holdings in a highly structured, regulated environment. And they are doing it while retail is selling. The supply mathematics behind 848 million locked XRP deserve a moment of careful attention, because the numbers produce a conclusion that most retail investors have not calculated. The total circulating supply of XRP sits at approximately 57 billion tokens. When the ETF holdings cross the 1 billion token threshold, which is imminent at the current accumulation pace, over 1.6% of the entire circulating supply will be permanently removed from active trading. Permanently. Not temporarily parked, not available for a retail seller to access. Locked inside regulated fund structures where the only way to exit is through the ETF redemption mechanism, not through exchange order books. And that 1 billion threshold is just the first wave. The SEC's approval of generic listing standards has opened the door for more than 50 spot altcoin ETFs, expected through 2026. The current 6 providers represent the beginning of an institutional accumulation infrastructure, not the completion of it. The pace of that accumulation from 771 million to 848 million in just 6 weeks is the specific data point that retail is systematically not pricing into its sentiment calculation. 77 million XRP absorbed by regulated ETF structures in 6 weeks. That is approximately 12.8 million tokens per week, flowing from exchange supply into regulated fund custody week after week without generating the kind of visible price impact that retail associates with significant buying activity. The reason the price impact is muted is precisely because the absorption is occurring through the ETF creation mechanism, which routes XRP purchases through authorized participants rather than public exchange order books. The visible order book does not register the demand, the available float contracts, and the gap between what retail perceives, a flat price, and what the supply structure reflects, a rapidly shrinking tradable float, widens every week that the accumulation continues. Now let us introduce the factor that changes the scale of this analysis entirely. BlackRock has not formally brought an XRP product to market yet. When they do, the dynamic changes in a way that the current ETF data cannot fully capture. BlackRock manages $10 trillion in assets. Vanguard, State Street, UBS, and JP Morgan combined manage over $60 trillion. When institutions of that scale make even a conservative allocation to a new asset class, the numbers are extraordinary. A 0.05% allocation from the combined $60 trillion AUM of just those top Wall Street institutions represents $30 billion in direct inflows. $30 billion into a market where 848 million tokens are already locked. The float is actively contracting, and OTC desks are paying premiums above the public price to source supply. The mathematical consequence of that capital entering a compressed supply structure is not a gradual price adjustment. It is a structural repricing event. Brad Garlinghouse confirms something at Consensus 2026 that reframes the entire institutional XRP thesis, and it is a statement that most retail analysts have not fully internalized. He said this is not a crypto problem, it is a global banking problem, and that distinction is everything. XRP is not being positioned as a better cryptocurrency, it is being positioned as the operational solution to a structural inefficiency that costs the global banking system trillions of dollars every year. The top 100 to 200 global banks hold between 150 trillion and 200 trillion in total assets. A significant portion of that capital is sitting completely idle in Nostro and Vostro accounts, pre-funded reserves that banks are required to maintain in foreign currency accounts, simply to guarantee that cross-border payments can be settled. This capital earns nothing. It generates no return. It simply sits there, fulfilling a pre-funding requirement that XRP's on-demand liquidity model eliminates entirely. The operational comparison between XRP and Bitcoin in the context of that $150 trillion problem is not a competitive argument. It is an architectural reality. Bitcoin settles in 10 minutes at a cost that scales with network congestion. For a bank moving $14 trillion in daily wholesale volume, JP Morgan's documented daily settlement figure, Bitcoin's settlement architecture is operationally incompatible. 10-minute settlement windows at variable transaction costs across $14 trillion in daily volume would introduce the kind of settlement risk and cost uncertainty that institutional treasury management cannot accept. XRP settles in under 4 seconds at a fraction of a cent per transaction, consistently regardless of network load. For the specific use case of replacing $150 trillion in idle Nostro and Vostro pre-funding with on-demand bridge settlement, XRP's architecture is not one option among many. It is the only architecture that meets the operational requirements. The central bank partnership dimension adds a layer of institutional validation that the ETF accumulation data alone cannot provide. Over 50 central bank partnerships have been confirmed in various stages of engagement with Ripple's settlement infrastructure. Central banks are not speculative investors. They are the entities responsible for maintaining the payment systems that entire national economies depend on. When a central bank evaluates a settlement infrastructure, the due diligence process is measured in years, not months. The confirmed engagement of more than 50 central banks with Ripple's technology is the output of that extended due diligence process. A process that begins with technical evaluation, progresses through legal and regulatory review, and concludes with the kind of institutional endorsement that no amount of retail community advocacy can replicate. These partnerships did not form because of price action. They formed because of operational performance. XRP settles the transactions that these central banks need to settle, at the speed and cost profile their operations require. The complete picture assembled from tonight's data produces a conclusion that the accumulation mathematics enforce with a precision that retail sentiment cannot override. 848 million XRP is locked in 6 institutional ETF structures, with the 1 billion threshold imminent. The pace of accumulation, 77 million in 6 weeks, continues without deceleration. BlackRock's $10 trillion has not yet entered the market. The combined $60 trillion of top Wall Street institutions represents $30 billion in inflows at a 0.05% allocation. The $150 trillion Nostro-Vostro problem is the specific documented banking inefficiency that XRP was architecturally designed to solve. Over 50 central bank partnerships confirm the operational validation. In the Clarity Act markup is the regulatory trigger that converts institutional positioning into legally authorized deployment at scale. The retail investor staring at a flat price chart is looking at the accumulation window. The institutional buyer staring at the same chart is looking at the last opportunity to build a position before the supply is no longer available at current prices. If this analysis changed how you're thinking about XRP, hit like and subscribe. I drop deep dive breakdowns like this twice a day to keep you ahead of the market.